Good evening. All right, well, and good evening to the Daf Yomi Fly who's with us. Daf Yomi for the month, sponsored by Michael Tsaidi for Atzlacha with making Aliyah and in honor of his late father, Zohar ben Ruvain. Zechron Avrocha. And Daf Yomi for the month is sponsored by Moshe and Susie Feder. Eloi Nishmas, Mr. Feder's father, Aryeh ben Michal, whose yahrzeit was on the 15th of Elul, and Eloi Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's mother, Roiza Bas Simcha Cohen, whose yahrzeit was on the 18th of Elul. May their neshamos have an aliyah. And Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Moshe, not Doctor, and Ruth Greenbaum. In gratitude to Rabbi Loiterman, myself, and Jeff Wald for their commitment to the Shiur. Hashem should give us the zechus to be Messiah Meseches Zevachim. Mirz Hashem by January. Mirz Hashem, right? I think that's where we are. Right. And Tuesday's Daf, that's today, is sponsored by Shlomo and Noemi Radcliffe. Bezechus a refuah shlema for Ephraim ben Shifra. So we should have a refuah shlema. Amen. Okay. Where we're going through one korban at a time, learning the rules of our Mishnah as far as having the proper intent, and we're getting the flow of these pages. And the flow of the pages essentially is, where do we know it from? We bring a pasuk, we say that we're okay, we get all our extra psukim. Where else do we know it from? We will try to learn something similar from something that's not similar. We say it's not similar. We try to say, well, let's have another case which is also not similar, and then we try to say, well, the two of those together can prove it. That's essentially what we've been doing. The last thing we proved, right, was about the chatos chelev, the individual korban chatos. And the individual korban chatos, our Mishnah had said that if a person has the wrong intent, whether for the wrong sacrifice or for the wrong person, it invalidates the sacrifice completely, cannot be brought at all. And that's because we had the psukim we learned from Shlomim. We learned it from Shlomim. Chatos and Shlomim were connected. And then we said then there were other additional psukim that are written specifically by the korban chatos. And as we know, when it comes to kodshim, when you've got something written twice, it means that without it, it ruins the korban. Mm-hmm. So now the next point that we have to make is v'ashkechon chatos chelev dichsiv ba. Right. So I understand why by the korban chatos it says, by the chatos chelev, the individual offering, it says by there la chatas. So that says that it has to be for a chatas offering. But chatas davoros kochavim. What about the sin offering that one brings if they commit idolatry? We said it's a different. It's a male goat instead of a female goat. We had learned. And what about v'chein chatas deshmias hakol? This was the a chatos when somebody is sworn to give a testimony and they refused to give testimony. We had this korban chatos that they had to bring the sin offering. It was an olav yorei, different type of a korban chatos. What about bitui sfasayim v'tumas mikdash v'kodshav delo ksivi buhu? Also, if somebody lies in court, or also if somebody is tamei and comes into the area of the base of mikdash. So all of those korbanos, olav yorei as well in those circumstances. So we have to, where do we know that those also have to be lishma? So the answer is chatas kochavim os yomei chatas chelev. Well, the sin offering that comes for avodah zarah, that we can learn. It's very similar in all of its rules, other than the animal itself. It's very similar in all its rules to the korban that one brings for any other individual aveira, because the punishment for avodas kochavim is kares, and so therefore it makes sense that those two go together. So that's fine. As shekin kares kamos, it also has kares v'hanach kulihi. And as far as all of these other types of korban chatos, so then they come osyon b'mehatzad. We're going to say that we are going to say that the connection between, we already learned that the korban chatos of a nazir and the korban chatos of a mitzorah are also required to have the right proper intention for those. From comparing the sin offering that one brings for their own personal leveira plus one of those two, you have all you need in order to prove that every other korban chatas is also mandatory, that you have the right intention. Why? Because what are you going to say? That the kares is going to stop, the kares is different by the chatas chelev. Well, the korban chatas of mitzorah or nazir don't have kares. And if you're going to say, well, the one of mitzorah, it has extra sacrifices, the one of nazir has extra sacrifices, the individual korban chatos doesn't have extra sacrifices, and so therefore we have enough information there to be able to combine those two together and say that basically that's the rule by korban chatos. All of them need to have all the proper intention. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. Our rabbis learned Pesach bismano lishmo kosher. Right? If I've got a korban Pesach, and I bring it on Erev Pesach. So, and I bring it for the sake of Pesach. That's kosher. That's going to make you a kosher korban Pesach. That's how it should go, right? Shelo lishmo, let's say you have it on the day of Erev Pesach, and you don't have the right intention. What happens? It's puzzle. The sacrifice is not valid at all, because we said korban Pesach for its own, on the day of Pesach, right? If you have the wrong intent in mind, that's going to ruin the sacrifice. Ubishar Yemos Hashanah. But if it's not Erev Pesach, what happens to your korban Pesach if you have the wrong intent? So lishmo pasul, if you sacrifice it for the sake of a korban Pesach, when it's not a korban Pesach, that ruins your offering, because you can't bring a korban Pesach if it's not Erev Pesach. Shelo lishmo, but if you say that you're going to have not the right intent, then ironically, it's kosher, then it's better. It's better to take your korban Pesach and have the wrong intent if it's not Erev Pesach than it is to have the right intent. If you have the right intent, you're bringing a korban Pesach illegally on the wrong time, which makes it invalid. But if you bring not a korban Pesach, it turns into a shlomim, as we had learned. And so therefore, shlomim can be brought any day, and that's why it's still kosher. Minani mili, what's the source for this sort of strange rule that Pesach is invalid the day before Pesach if you have the wrong intent, but then it's valid if it's not the right day before if you have the wrong intent? So Amar Avu de Shmuel's father says, Amar Kro, the pasuk says, Vim minatzon korbano, if his sacrifice comes from sheep, right? The sheep or like tzon is what's it? Small cattle, small animals. Sheep and goats are tzon, right? So then lezevach shlomim laHashem. So then, this means, this pasuk is talking that if that's what you're bringing as your offering, the pasuk says, if you bring a small animal for your korban shlamim to Hashem, how are we going to read that pasuk? Davar haba minatzon, if you are bringing a korban, which is the type of korban that you can only bring from small animals. What type of korban is that? A korban Pesach only comes from small animals. Yehei lezevach shlamim. It can become and turned into a kosher korban shlamim. Now, that means your korban, this pasuk is, we're reading it not in the basic, simple way of reading this pasuk, but the way we're reading it is, if you bring a sheep offering that's a korban Pesach, then you can turn it into a shlamim. Ema shlamim in midi achrini lo. So that means, right, that it turns into, the korban Pesach turns into a shlamim, right, turns into shlamim, but what if you have in mind a different korban? Let's say you're bringing your korban Pesach, and you change it, and you have in mind it should be an olah, right? Maybe it shouldn't be valid at all. Well, you can. What happens to it? Is it invalid? No, because we said in our Mishnah, if you do it not for the, doesn't say in our Mishnah that if you do your Pesach for the sake of a shlamim, it's a shlamim. It says if you do your Pesach for the sake of another korban, it becomes a shlamim. Meaning, even if I designate my korban Pesach as an olah, it turns into a shlamim. Why is that? Because now, it says, Ihava ksiv l'shlamim v'zevach Kamart. He says, well, because if it would have said that your korban Pesach, your tzon offering, which is your korban Pesach, turns into a shlamim and an offering, so then it would be like you said, right? Shlamim or any other offering. But hashdechsiv lezevach shlamim, now that it says your sheep offering turns into an offering of a shlamim, lekol deshachit le shlamim lihave. Whatever wrong intent you have in mind for your korban Pesach, it automatically turns into a shlamim. That's the only option. So therefore, if you think that you want, is you says, I take my korban Pesach, and it's not Erev Pesach, and I say, this is going to be a korban olah, what happens? It becomes a kosher shlamim. So, ema lezevach, let's go through this klal pratu klal business. So we're going to try this again, right? So it says lezevach, a korban, it becomes a korban, that's the klal. That could be the general. Zevach is any animal korban. Shlamim, the shlamim is the prat, that's going to be the specific type of korban. So klal prat. So let's learn it as what it's saying is, this is the generality and the specific. Ein bechal ela ma shebeprat. So we're only going to include that which is in the specific and say that it becomes a korban shlamim. So shlamim in midi achrina lo. So therefore it means that if your korban, if you have in mind when you change your korban Pesach to turn it into a shlamim, then it's kosher as a shlamim. Not if you turn it into any other korban. This way, we're learning the pasuk now, if you turn it doesn't say Lizevach Shlomim, meaning you're turning this into a sacrifice of a Shlomim, means that the only korban your korban Pesach can be kosher for is a Shlomim. And if you have in mind a different sacrifice, it's not kosher. So the answer is La Hashem. Hadru klal, the word La Hashem at the end is a klal at the end. So therefore, you have a prat uklal uprat, right? And therefore, there are going to be other rules that are like the. It's a klal uprat uklal. Thank you. Klal uprat uklal. So therefore, there's going to be other rules that are similar to the prat. So therefore, it doesn't matter which sacrifice you have in mind; it's going to turn into a korban shlomim. That's hers. So maskif la Rabbi Yaakov min Narpikod. So Rabbi Yaakov from Narpikod asked the question. Lo domi kol basar kol kama. We were expecting this, right? How do you bring the general rule at the beginning where it says zevach, which is only going to include some of the services, and then you're mentioning La Hashem at the end, which is a much broader, more inclusive term. Kol kama merabi Zevachim v'tulo. The first klal only is going to include all the sacrifices, the korban chatas, the korban ola, the korban shlamim. And then klal basra, the end says La Hashem, which is kol de La Hashem, which is going to include all sacrifices to Hashem, not just animal sacrifices, vafilu la ofos, vafilu la menachos. Even if you bring the offering for birds, or an offering is a meal offering. So therefore, it should, what we're suggesting is, so all of those are going to be brought. This should be a klal prat. We should go back to calling this a klal prat, not a klal prat uklal, because the klal at the end is too inclusive compared to the klal at the beginning. So the answer is Tana de Rishmal b'kol uprati dorish ki hai gavna. The answer is when we learned in our brisa that we say every morning about the 13 principles and says Tana de Rishmal and it includes klal prat uklal. This is the same type of klal prat uklal that's inclusive.
We see it in the korbanos right before Shachar.
That's correct, right? So therefore, that's going to be included. That's a klal prat uklal. So now, what happens now if I'm learning this as a klal prat uklal? Iatadon elekeina prat. I'm going to rule that this korban becomes something that is like the shlomim, but not exclusively shlomim. Ma prat mefurish shehu shelo lishmo v'kosher. Just like, right, we know that it's very clear by a korban shlomim, right? It's a type of offering that if you bring it for the wrong intent, it's still kosher. Af kol shehu shelo lishmo v'kosher. So therefore, it becomes this korban paste becomes a shlomim as long as you intend for it to be another type of korban that, similar to shlomim, is kosher if you sacrifice it not for the sake of a proper korban. Okay? Ima prat mefurash davar haba beneder ubenedava. Yeah, but you know what else is true about shlomim? It has to be an offering that comes as a promise, right? So af kol haba beneder ubenedava. So then I'm also going to include only those other offerings that are things that you bring in promises, such as an ola or a shlamim. Those are voluntary offerings. I decide one day I want to bring an ola, I decide I want to bring a shlamim, I can bring it at any time. So those would be yes, that would be included. But chatos ve'asham, but if I shecht my korban pesach for the sake of a chatos or a korban asham, which the only way that I bring those is if I do some kind of avera wrong, so then that shouldn't allow my korban pesach to turn into a shlamim. Will work. Ella, so that is not how we're going to learn this. We're not learning this as a klal prat uklal. We're going to go back into zevach rebuyahu. The word zevach is simply extra, and that means lekol deshachit le lihave kavase. Anything that you shecht the korban pesach for, it will then become a korban shlamim. Right? Or, 1 second. Zevach, who is a ribo yesh l'rab must be meno shekol korban shapasach nishchat lishmo yapasach kamoso shechashem shlomim yeshlomim ve'im la'ola ya'ola. No, that's what we're suggesting at this point is that the zevach means that if I shecht my korban for the sake of anything else, it should become anything else. That's what we're suggesting at this point. So therefore, if I shecht my korban pesach as an ola, it should turn into an ola. If I shech my korban pesach as a shlamim, then it should turn into a shlamim. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Abin. Rabbi Abin says, Dochin kodshim hanecholim etzel kodshim hanecholin. Vein dochin kodshim hanecholin etzel kodshim she'ena necholin. Time out. You're turning a korban pesach into what? It makes sense to turn a korban pesach into another type of offering that people eat, i.e. non-kohanim. Shlomim is the only one that regular non-kohanim can eat. A korban chatas, a korban asham, those are eaten by kohanim. A korban olah is eaten by nobody. So it doesn't make sense for you to suggest that a korban pesach can turn into a korban olah or a chatas or an asham. It can only turn into a shlomim. Okay, so atu chatas ve'asham milo misachli. He says, what are you talking about? A korban asham and a chatas is eaten, just eaten by kohanim. So you should turn a korban pesach, which is eaten by certain people, into a korban chatas or korban asham, which is also eaten by certain people.
Those certain people are kohanim?
Just those certain people are kohanim. Korban chatas, korban asham is eaten by kohanim. Ella, rather, dochin kodshim hanecholin lechol adam. Rather, no, we like the idea of turning a korban pesach, which can be eaten by any person, into a korban shlomim, which can be eaten by any person. Right? So that makes more sense. We're not going to take an animal which was once designated as a korban pesach, which can be eaten by anybody, and turn it into a chatas or an asham that can only be eaten by a kohen. Therefore, we're going to say Lezevach only comes to allow us to turn the korban pesach into a korban shlomim. Okay? So, another reason why we can change the korban pesach specifically into a korban shlomim. So Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Abin Omar, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Abin says, Dochin kodshim kalim etzel kodshim kalin. We talked, when we read the Mishnah, there are levels of korbanos, right? There's kodshe kodshim, the highest, holiest level of korbanos. Those offerings we're going to learn have special rules as far as where they can be slaughtered, where they can be eaten, and the like. And then we have kodshe kalim. We have more lenient ones that can be eaten in other places, in Yerushalayim, not necessarily inside the Beis HaMikdash. And then we have other ones which are sort of a kodshe kalim, and they're a little bit lighter, like the firstborn animals or meiser animals. Okay, so we have layers. It makes more sense that if you're turning a korban pesach into something, it should be on something in the equivalent level. A korban chatas, a korban asham, guilt offering, sin offering, a burnt offering, those are the highest kodshim levels. A korban pesach is on the kodshe kalim levels. It's on the lower level korbanos. Therefore, shlamim and personal shlamim is also on the kodshe kalim level. Therefore, it makes sense to transfer it over to that one.
The only thing I have is, if you have the kavanah, it's a korban pesach, and it's not this man. What is it?
If you have in mind that it should be a korban pesach, not this man, it's puzzle.
Right.
Yes.
So why are we saying it has to have all the attributes of a korban pesach, when if it was a korban pesach itself, it's puzzle?
Yeah. Well, we're not saying that it has all the attributes of a korban pesach. We're just suggesting that when the Torah is going to turn it into something, it's going to make the change to that which is most similar to it.
Right. I'm just saying, like, it itself couldn't be a korban pesach at that point. Right?
It can't be, because it's not. Yeah, you can't shech the korban pesach in the middle of Tishrei. Right. So therefore, if you did shech the korban pesach, it would be like shechting korban at night, shechting it at a time that you can't bring a korban. Right. So therefore, it would be invalid.
But then that would turn into a shlomim.
It would not.
Why?
If you because you didn't change it. Right. You didn't invalidate it. The time invalid. The only way for you to turn your korban pesach into a korban shlomim is if you have your mind, if your mind invalidates it by changing it into a different korban.
Right.
Okay. Maskif lo Rabbi Yitzchak Berbi, so Savrin. So Rabbi Yitzchak Berbi Savrin asks the following question on that point we just made. Ema shachtei l'shem maser lihavi meiser. Let's say the change isn't turning korban pesach into a korban shlomim. Let's say you change the korban pesach into a korban that's a meiser behema, the 10th animal. After all, you just said we're going to move it over to another kodshe kalim, the lower level. We said kodshe kalim includes firstborn animals. It includes the 10th animal, right? So lihavi meiser. This korban pesach should turn into a meiser, right? 10th animal. Rule of 10th animal is
anyone can eat it, right?
The regular person can eat. Anyone can eat it. So that's not going to be a question on that one either, right? So lemay hilchasa. So what difference does it make whether you turn it into a korban shlomim or a meiser korban? At the end of the day, same korban, right? Isn't it? No. Deloli boy nesachim. With a korban shlomim, you have to bring oil and wine together with that offering. With a korban meiser, the meiser behema doesn't require any oil or wine. You just bring the animal.
Why do you have to bring oil and wine for the korban?
Torah says so. Right? Says so. Right? Torah tells us by korban shlomim, you shall bring this much wine, this much oil.
Yep, that's a good answer.
Right?
Torah says so.
I'll tell you that. There are probably many Kabbalistic reasons why things are being brought for, right?
Sure.
But yeah, for the sake of Daf Yomi, the answer is the Torah says so. So, and ula milka ole. And also the other thing is, if there's you're not allowed, if you have an animal that is designated as the 10th animal, you're not allowed to redeem it, right? And if you do redeem that animal, right, so then you get malchus, you get a los, because the los say, pasuk says, lo yigal, you're not allowed to redeem it, right? So therefore, if you're not allowed to redeem it. So there's no prohibition of redeeming by the korban shlomim. It just doesn't work, but it's not a los haseh. So therefore, that's another difference. So okay, so the answer is below yigal amar kra hasiri. So that's the pasuk says the 10th you're not allowed to redeem it, right? That's what we just said. So now hasiri yeh kodesh. So the reason why it can't become the 10th animal is because the pasuk says the 10th animal becomes holy. Zeh meiser ve'ein acher meiser. Only the 10th animal becomes the 10th animal, not a changeover from a korban pesach to a 10th animal. You can't have a change. You can't make an animal into the tithed animal by turning a korban pesach into one. The only way for you to get there is to count your animals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then number 10. You don't do that with your sheep, yeah. You're supposed to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Ema shachtei l'shem bechor liave kebechor. Okay. Well, there's one other korban we didn't talk about yet. Let's turn this korban pesach into another kodesh kalim. Let's turn it into a bechor, firstborn animal. So that one goes to Kohanim, by the way. It doesn't get eaten by everybody. So lemay hilchasol, what difference does that make? Again, first of all, deloli by nesachim. It doesn't need oil and wine like the korban shlomim does. Inami deles vela kohanim. Second of all, and I'd have to give the animal to the kohanim to eat, right? It's their animal. Bechor goes to the kohanim. So bechor nami avra mimaiser. So the Gemara says the reason why I can't is because we have a gzera shava to compare the bechor. A lot of the rules of a bechor and meiser are similar. So avara. So since the two psukim, since the word avara is written both by the 10th animal and it's written by bechor, the rules are the same. So one rule about a meiser is you can't turn a korban pesach into a meiser. Therefore, the rule is also you can't turn a korban pesach into a bechor. Okay, so you're only left with one choice. It's got to turn into a shlomim. Okay, ve'ema shachtei l'shem temura lehave temura. So okay, what if there's another choice? What if he turns the animal? He says, "I'm shechting this for the sake of being the illegal temura offering." Right? A temura offering, right, is if I have an animal that was already consecrated and I say, nah, I changed my mind. I want to bring another animal instead. So the rule is that it becomes a temura, becomes also consecrated in the same way that the original animal was. They both are now consecrated. And not only that, you get the added pleasure of being whipped and getting lashes for violating a prohibition.
Sorry, say that again.
Right? If a person commits temura, you've got an animal that's already sanctified. You say, nah, I want to change it into this animal. So, number one.
What type of sacrifice is temura?
That's what I'm saying. It's because the same rules as whatever the original one is. So now they are both holy, and you get lashes for doing it. Right?
So
a lot of lashes.
made a temura without even saying this is a temura.
So there, right. So now can I I would like this korban to be a temura. Right? How does that work? So lemay hilchasa, what difference?
You don't even have to say it. You just have to think it.
Yeah, well, yes. Right. Well, that was, by the way, part of our discussion. We had Machlokas Rashi and Tosfos as whether you have to speak in order to be violating these thought prohibitions.
It's going to be Chayav Malchus if he didn't speak. Right?
That's a big part of it. Yes, that would be a big part of this Gemara, which we're about to say. Yes, how could you be chayav malchus for a tamura if you didn't say anything? That would be a good question, and I don't know if any of the Rishonim point that out here, but I think that's a great point.
The machshava all count
Machshava. So that's what I'm saying. So it's not. So you have to speak it out. We'll go with the simple explanation is that you actually have to say out loud, I'm changing my korban to something else. That's why we said earlier, remember that when they told the Kohanim, don't say anything when you're bringing the korbanos, because you can't ruin it that way.
Right. And it's
right?
bittul, it's like...
Therefore, even if you think the wrong thing, but you don't say it, sounds like we're saying it's okay. Right? That's how that Gemara sounded. So, what difference does it make? Number one, if you just turned your korban pesach into a tamura, congratulations, you get malchus. Right? Inami lemekim alei below yimocher v'lo yigal. Also, that I should also now have a prohibition against selling or redeeming this tamura, because you're not allowed to sell or redeem a tamura either. So Amar Marzutra, says, Breder of Nachman, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, V'hayahu u'tamura so. It and its exchanged animal will both be holy, that's what the pasuk says, which means, Zu tamura ve'ein acher tamura. It says, Hu tamura so. It will be a tamura. That's all. This only the animal that actually, the only way to make a tamura is to make it a tamura. You can't turn a korban pesach into a tamura. Okay, so now that's up. Ema shachte l'shem toda. Why don't we go to the toda now? Right? Let's say he shechts his korban pesach and has in mind, I want it to be a Thanksgiving offering. Can you do that? Can it turn into that lihave ki toda? So let's turn it into a toda. That's another kachek halal.
If you are doing it for Thanksgiving, should you offer a turkey for the...
No, you should offer bread. Thanksgiving offerings come with bread, right? They don't come with turkey in the base of English. What is the halacha? What difference does that make? Lahatino lechem. Should you have to bring extra bread? When you're doing a korban shlamim, remember, korban toda is a shlamim. But then you've got 40 loaves of bread that come with it, right? 40, 10 of various types. Fried bread, deep fried bread, baked bread, right? All different types, right?
Bread.
So donuts. So you think if you have to think, you're thinking bread. I'm thinking donuts and cake. Okay. Mi ika midi de pesach gufe lo boy lechem umosro boy lechem. That wouldn't make sense, because the original offering was a korban pesach. You just changed it into a korban toda and upped the requirement. I understand what you were saying before, right? Now that korban pesach require whatever. If a korban pesach doesn't require bread, if you can change it into a korban that does require it. That doesn't make sense.
I was going to say you can't eat your korban pesach only with matzah, right? So you can't have that.
Oh, that's yes. Well, remember, it's lo bizmano, so it's okay. So ihachi, if that was going, and by the way, all the loaves are not chametz. Right, by a korban toda. Generally speaking, we don't bring any chametz on the mizbeach except for it's the korban by Shavuos, right?
It's like matzah style.
Yes, it's all matzah style. Exactly. All the loaves of bread are actually baked quickly within 18 minutes.
Donuts.
Yeah. Well, they're kosher Pesach donuts.
Pizza.
Sounds really bad.
Donut at home.
Ihachi, if that were the case, if you're telling me that if you have a korban pesach, you can't add on anything to the korban, then how can you turn it into a shlamim? So hashanami mi'ika midi de pesach gufei lo boy nesachim umoser boy nesachim. The korban pesach doesn't need any oil or wine, but we know a shlamim does. If you're going to turn the korban pesach into a shlamim, then you just added the wine and the oil to it. So anan hachi kamim. This is what we mean to say. Mi'ika midi de moser toda atzma lo boy lechem. No, what we mean to say is this. If I had a korban toda, let's say somebody separated an animal for his korban toda, and he lost it. So what does he do? He goes and gets another animal. He's going to bring korban toda. And then he says, oh, look, here it is. Now he's got two. So what does he do? He brings one as a korban toda. That one needs all the bread. And then the other one, we call it a mosar, an extra. He's got the extra one. What do you do with that one? You sacrifice it also. But the extra one doesn't require bread. So how could it be if I had a korban toda that came as a result of another korban toda, it wouldn't require bread? And now a korban toda that comes as a result of korban pesach requires bread? That doesn't make sense. Toda to toda should for sure be more appropriate for bread than pesach to toda transfer. Ella moser de osiyalahu me alma boy lechem. Right now, if you're telling me that this is this extra that comes from a Pesach is going to require bread? That doesn't make sense. So what we've done is, by process of elimination, we've said that Korban Pesach must turn into a shlamim because it's the only one of the Kodshei Kalim that makes any sense. Okay, so that is our conclusion. So we have multiple sources. A lot of these times we have multiple sources for the same halacha, right? Once we tried to learn it from a pasuk, then we tried to learn it from kodshei, made some logic, kodshei kalim instead of kodshei kodshim that are going to be eaten. Okay, now, maskif la Rav Yemar braid de Rav Hillel. So Rav Yemar, the son of Rav Hillel, says, "Umimai de b'moser Pesach ksiv, Dilma b'moser Osham ksiv." So he has the question. You said that if you have a korban which is brought from tzon, it turns into a shlamim. That's what you said. And what korban comes from tzon? A korban pesach. I'll have another offering that only comes from tzon. A korban asham. The guilt offering also comes from small animals, right? And so if that is the case, so then why is it not true that we should learn from here that a korban asham, shechted shelo lishmo, turns into a korban shlamim? So, mimai b'moser pesach ksiv. Who says it's the extra korban pesach? Dilma b'moser asham ksiv. Maybe it's coming as the extra asham. If it's an asham, you take the wrong in mind by the korban asham, it should turn into a shlamim.
I think you're not allowed to have an extra korban Pesach. Or certain korbanim you can.
So you can't have extra, right? But if you have an extra, you're going to turn it into a shlamim, right? That's what we've been discussing, right? You've got this extra, it's turned into a shlamim. The question we want to know is, why is the Pesach turning into a shlamim? Why are we not learning from this pasuk that an asham is turning into a shlamim? And asham also is categorized as a korban that comes from tzon. So the answer is, Amar Kro, the pasuk says, V'im minat tzon korbano l'zevach shlamim. So it says that if it comes from a sacrifice that is from tzon, then it turns into a shlamim. Davar hashave bekol hatzon. A korban pesach, you can bring it from either a sheep or a goat, right? You have a choice. Therefore, all types of tzon are valid for a korban pesach. Therefore, when this pasuk says, if you're bringing a korban that comes from tzon, so that works by Pesach, because korban Pesach, if you're talking about korban Pesach, because it comes from any of them. But an asham only comes from goats. Ashams are only goats. You can't bring a sheep asham. So therefore, it wouldn't be right for the Torah to say, if it comes from a tzon korban, you're right, a goat is a tzon, but not all tzon are goats, right? So therefore, it's better to understand the pasuk as the korban Pesach. Maskif lo Rav Abin Bar Chia, so Rav Abin Bar Chia has the following question. V'itema Rabbi Abin Bar Kahana, says Rav Abin Bar Kahana, Bechol asar at amart min lahotzi. You know, whenever you are learning around, we're going to have this many times in when we're talking about korbanos. When the pasuk says min hatzon, or min this, min that, it means from amongst that type, not all of those types. So therefore, if the pasuk says from the tzon, I don't know what there's a word for tzon. That's like cattle is large. What's the word that I would use for like the small sheep and goats? I would just think from sheep and goats, which means it should be a korban that comes from sheep or goats, but not both. Because the word min means only from one of those two, not from both of those two. The kan, min lerabos. Here, you're saying, no, min means from both. It's got to come from both of those things. That's not the way we normally use the word min. So Amar Rav says, money. So Amar of money, so money answers, hachanami, you're right. Min is lahotzi. Right? Amar of money, right?
Amar of money is a great name.
So he says, here too, min is going to tell us some yes and some no. Delo asi ben shtei shonim velo asi ben nekeva. It has to be, remember, korban pesach can't come from any type of tzon, right? A korban pesach only comes from an animal that's in its first year. A korban pesach only comes from a male animal, not a female animal. Therefore, when we say it's a korban that comes from tzon, it means a korban pesach that can only come from amongst some of the types of tzon. Okay? So, Maskiflo Rav Chana Bagdata, so Rav Chana from Baghdad, he said, and you see this Jewish community that was there in Baghdad back then, right? Umi matzis amart dechi kosiv hai b'moser pesach ksiv. what you're suggesting is that this pasuk is, again, we're still stuck a little bit on this idea that this pasuk is talking of Pesach. Because it doesn't say in the pasuk, your Pesach turns into a shlomim. It says, if your korban that comes from small animal becomes a shlomim. Im kasev im eiz mikal delav b'mosar pesach ksiv. It says in the pasuk that it can come from either a kasev or an eiz, which means, right, that this pasuk is not talking about korban pesach, because the korban pesach says mina kvasim umina izim. It can come from kvasim or izim, but why does it say? Hold on a second. Im kasef im eiz mikal delap b'mosar pesach siv. So because if the pesach kasev it wouldn't be necessary if it was talking about a korban pesach. We already know that a korban pesach is brought from kivasim and izim, and yet the pasuk that we're dealing with here, right? Im minat tzon. If your korban is from tzon, then you could bring it as a shlamim, which is going to be a kesev or an eiz, a goat or a sheep. Now, if we're talking about the korban being a korban pesach, we already know that the animal being brought is a goat or a sheep, because those are only two choices anyway that we know from korban pesach. Why does the pasuk have to repeat here that the animal that you're bringing as the shlamim is a goat or a sheep? Seems redundant. So therefore, the better explanation of this pasuk is, if you are bringing a tzon for your korban shlamim, new rule, it needs to be from a goat or a sheep, having nothing to do with korban pesach.
That's the pshat of the pasuk.
That is the pshat of the pasuk. So we're trying to say the pshat of the pasuk is probably the only way to understand this pasuk, right? So the answer is, I need that extra keves or a's in order to teach me something else. Keves lerabos es ha-pesach le'aliyah. So the word keves means to tell me that by the korban pesach, if you have a keves, if your animal is a sheep, so then you have a fatty tail. And the fatty tail is not you do, but the animal does. You're not supposed to eat that. That's supposed to be burned together with all of the fats, right? And keshu omer im kesev, when the pasuk says im kesev, that is l'rabos pesach she'ibrosh nosa. That comes to tell me also, if the korban pesach changes over to the next year, so then it comes to be included. V'shlamim haboy machmas pesach lekol mitzvos shlamim. So, and that also means that any korban shlamim that comes because of a pesach has to be done fully and completely like a shlamim. Sheyat inu smicha, which means that you need to lean on it, unesachim, and you need to bring the oil and the wine with it. Utnufas chazav v'shok, and you need to wave the parts of the animal by a shlamim that you have to wave. Keshu omer, when the pasuk says im eiz, so when it says im eiz, hifsik ha'inyan v'limed ala eiz she'ena tu'una aliyah, tells me that by the eiz, that it doesn't need, it says that's different though. By the eiz, by the goat, you don't need to burn the tail. So, one second, how are we learning this?
So by
the sheep you do, by the goat you do not.
What we said before about a shulman, like when we were bringing in oila, as long as it was in the pen, once we put the animal in the field, it automatically was a shulman, even if you brought it as an oila, right? Did we not say that before?
We were talking about a different korban. Now we're talking about korban pesach.
No, I know, but why would different rules apply in terms of?
Because different psukim. Right? These psukim, this pasuk is telling me that this korban pesach turns into a shlamim. Right? That was by a korban, was it asham? We said if I had an asham turns into an olah, once you have it and you put it into the pen already, then you're not supposed to, right? Right. Those the asham turns into an olah. But one second. Hahu. So we're using this kesev and eiz to teach me the rules of this brisa, which means that by the keves you need to be able to, when he brings kesev tells me that if that if you have a Pesach that goes beyond its year, so once you have a korban pesach that goes beyond its year, you can't bring it as a korban pesach anymore. So if you're bringing that animal as a shlamim now, it needs all the rules of a shlamim. Also, if I have a korban, a shlamim that became a shlamim because you shechted your korban pesach shelo lishma, it also becomes a shlamim. You also bring everything as a shlamim. So, however, then when it continues on, im A's, if it's an A's, tells me that the goat doesn't have the same rules as that. Which means that the goat does not need to have its tail burnt on the mizbeach. That's how this brisa reads, I guess. So, but the point is that the reason why we're bringing it is that kesev and A's are brought for a different purpose. Therefore, the fact that this pasuk mentions kesev and A's doesn't go against us understanding this pasuk as a korban pesach. That's the reason why we brought it. Okay. Now, v'ha mehachanafka. Okay, so the Gemara wants to know. We have now 3 drashos of a pesach that is brought on that's wrong. Why do we need 3 drashos? That the korban pesach, we're going to see that there are 3 different drashos that the korban pesach brought not in the right time becomes a korban shlamim. V'ha mehachanafka is this that are really our source that im kesev im A's. That this pesach, I'm sorry, this idea, that we just brought the rule, let's go again. I'm turning my Pesach that's now a year old into a korban shlamim, and it needs to come together with all of the rules of a korban shlamim.
It's a year old, isn't it? Is it expired?
It's expired, correct. But now what happens to the expired korban Pesach? It becomes a shlamim, okay? And that comes from the rule im kesev, okay? Now we want to know, is that really the source for that law? We've got other sources for that law, right? That comes nafka. That comes from a different place. Mida avua de Shmuel nafka. We're going to learn it from the brisa that the father of Shmuel taught. Da'amar avua de Shmuel. The father of Shmuel said, "Ve'im min hatzon korbano." If his korban comes from the tzon, from the sheep, lezevach shlamim, then it becomes a korban shlamim, davar haba minatzon yehei lezevach shlamim, right? So then this is telling us that something that is from tzon turns into a shlamim, right? So that tells us davar haba minatzon comes to shlamim, like we said before. And so therefore, that tells us that you're going to bring it as anything that was a Pesach turns into a shlamim. That's our rule. I don't need im kesev im A's to tell me anything extra from that. Now, ve'akasi midrav Nachman. So, and still, even without avodah Shmuel, I can learn it from a different place besides. So I've got 3 different places teaching me the same thing, which is midrav Nachman Amar Rav Arvua Nafka Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Arvua. He says like this: Minayin lemoser Pesach shkar shlamim. How do I know that the animal that is no longer korban Pesach turns into a shlamim? Right? Let's say, for example, the moser Pesach is when I bring 2 korban Pesachs. Because I had one, I lost it, I got another one, then I find the first one again. How do I know the first one I bring now, but I'm going to bring the first one as my Pesach, my second one now turns into a korban shlamim, shenemar, because the pasuk says, v'zavachta Pesach la'Hashem Elokecha tzonu bakar, right? You're going to bring the korban Pesach to Hashem as a tzon and bakar. Now, that makes no sense. V'alo ein Pesach ba'el min ha'kvasim min ha'izim. Korban Pesach is never bakar. There's never a cow. You never have a large animal as a korban Pesach. Ella mikan. So therefore, this must be telling us lemoser Pesach shehei ledavar haba min hatzonu v'abakar. That means, sorry,
lambs or goats.
Dozidotes, and kids will eat ivy. But lambs are not goats. Lambs are sheep.
No, lambs or goats.
Lambs or goats, yes. I thought I heard you say lambs are goats. Lambs or goats, yes. Now I can bring it also. Therefore, what this is telling me is a korban Pesach a korban Pesach can turn into an offering that can be brought as small or large animals. I.e., a Pesach can turn into a shlamim. Shlamim can be brought from any type of kosher animal. Umayni shlamim. So ela tlosa kroi ksivi. I've got 3 psukim telling me the same rule. That a shlamim that a Pesach turns into a shlamim. Why do I need 3 different sources for that? So the answer is chad leibra zmano. The first is to tell me that if the time for the korban Pesach is past, not supposed to be bringing it today, and I bring the korban Pesach on the wrong day, then that is going to turn into a shlamim. Second, ibra ve'ibra shnoso. the korban becomes expired, as Yehuda said, right? It became too old.
Moldy.
So it's an old korban. So now once it's old, it's also turns into shlomim. And v'chad, the third one is she'ibras mano velo shnaso. The other one says, what if I have a circumstance? I'm sorry, I read this wrong. Chad li'ibras mano ve'ibras shnaso. The first one is if it becomes past Pesach and it becomes too old. V'chad li'ibras mano velo shnaso. One is if it's not the right time, but it's still in its first year. And that and the third one is Chad Ibra Loz Mano Velo Shnaso. And the other one tells me even if it's not past Pesach and it's not past the time, it's still going to turn into a shlomim. So no matter what the circumstance, your Pesach always turns into a shlomim. Utsrichi, and I need all three cases because there would be reason to say that this rule of turning a Pesach into a shlomim wouldn't apply in all cases. The ikos of Rachman Achad, if it would have only told me one of these, so Havamina Hecha de Ibra Shnasa Uzmano. I would say, look, if you were waiting around with your Korban Pesach and now it's Iyar, you missed Pesach, and your animal also got too old, so then, okay, I get it, turns into a shlomim. Why? Because this isn't the right animal, it's past the time, you missed it. So now it turns into a shlomim. Aval ibros mano v'lo shnaso, however, let's say it's past Pesach, but it's not a year old yet, it's not a full year yet. So dechazi lepesach sheni, this korban could still be a Pesach sheni, right? Could be somebody's Pesach sheni. Now this guy doesn't have to bring a Pesach sheni, so that's why it's not. But we're thinking the korban isn't really invalidated yet. Didn't turn into a shlomim. I would say amalo. I would say you can't bring it as a shlomim yet.
He doesn't have to bring a Pesach sheni because he had a first korban.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
For those who do have the first korban Pesach, then have to bring a Pesach sheni.
Then of course you could. That is for sure is not. Then it wouldn't be past his man, and that wouldn't be our issue, right? Because of Rachmana Hanitarti, if the pasuk told me even though it passes its time, right, that it's not too old. Mishum deidchi lahu mi l'saihu. Well, you can't bring it as a Pesach anymore. You missed it. Then it's too late. But what if your animal is just 9 months old and Pesach is next month and it's going to be fine, dechazi lepesach, and it's still appropriate, I can bring it for Korban Pesach, and now I shachted shelo lishmo, how do I know that one turns into a shlamim? Another third pasuk. So therefore, imalo, I might think not, so tzrichi, I have all three
psukim.
psukim.
Only on the day of Pesach.
So, Avar Zmano is Pesach has passed. This is still being happened.
Lo Avar Zmano does that mean?
That means it's anytime before Pesach. That's correct. Because remember, if you do it Shelo Lishmo on Erev Pesach, then your Korban's puzzle.
Right, so it's only.
So this has to be not
before. Yeah.
It has to be on a day that's not Erev Pesach. Right? Okay.
Well, when is when is it considered not after but before? You know what I mean? Like, is it after Rosh Hashanah where we don't?
No, it's going to be by Pesach, right? Pesach.
But after Zman is
right after Pesach.
After Pesach to Rosh Hashanah.
Well, remember that it's after Pesach. This animal can never be brought next year, right? Because the animal only gets 1 year, right? After that, it's going to be too old. So therefore, once Pesach is passed, this animal, even though it's not too old yet, is an expired animal. It's expired korban, right? Past its sell date. Okay. Amarav mishmei de mavug. Rav says the name of mavug. Chatas sheshachta l'shem chatas nachshon keshera. What if, right? I take my korban chatos and I slaughter it. It's supposed to be for an individual sin offering. And this Kohen says, I'm going to slaughter it for the sake of a nasi who is dedicating the Mishkan. Nachshon ben Aminadav. He brought a korban chatos in order to inaugurate the what do you call it? The Ol Moed, the Mishkan, right?
How can you give a sin offering for someone to inaugurate a nasi?
How can you do any of these things?
Right, so really you can't bring it at all, right? Okay. So it's kosher. You haven't invalidated it. Why? How do you know that? Damar Kros, the pasuk says. It doesn't matter how ludicrous the chatos is that you pick. That's what we're going to be pointing. Despite the fact that you're shechting it for the sake of a korban chatos that doesn't exist, not possible. Well, Amar Kro, the pasuk says, "Zos Toras hachatos." This is the rule by a korban chatos. Torah achas lekol hachatos. Achatos is achatos. Therefore, even though, according to this opinion, right, even though you take somebody's regular sin offering and you turn it into a korban chatos that doesn't, for somebody who's dead and somebody service that doesn't exist anymore, nevertheless, it's still kosher because it was not invalidating. You didn't turn it from a chatos into something else. You kept it as a chatos, so you're okay. Yosef Rava v'kamar laha shmeisa. So Rava was sitting and he was, saying over this teaching. Ace favor of Misharshi Rava. So Rav Misharshi asked Rava on this. He says, Rabbi Shimon says, Kol minachos she nikmitzu shelo lishman, any korban mincha. Okay, so korban mincha is a flour offering. You put the flour into a utensil, and then the kohen comes along and does kmitza. He takes his 3 fingers, dips it in, and he takes a piece of the korban out. So ksheros, korban, even though you do it shelo lishman, the korban is kosher. Va'alu lebalim l'shum chova, and it counts for the owner. That's going to be a difference between zvachim and menachos. Menachos are going to still count. Lefisha ein ha-menachos domos l'zvachim, because in this regard, korban mincha and a korban zevach and an animal sacrifice are not the same. Shakomet machvas l'shem marcheshes. If somebody has a machvas korban, which is a flat frying pan, and one says a marcheshes, which is, I think, a deep fried pan.
Is it flatter than a rock or?
How flat is the frying pan?
Yeah, is it flatter than a rock or?
I don't know how flat, but the pan is flat. There's no rock. I don't know how flat rocks are. It depends on the rock, right? I have a flat pan, or I have a deep fried pan. So, ma'aseha muchachin olei shehi machvas. The actions that you're then going to do, you're going to take this dough and you're going to fry it. You're going to cook it. So your intent, your mind gets overruled by the action. It's irrelevant. So chareva l'shem belula. If I have a dry offering, right, doesn't have any oil on it, and I put it into a offering and I sacrifice with the intent that it should be an offering that has oil in it. So then, masa muchachin shehi chariva. It's clear. It's not. You can't. It doesn't matter what your intention is. You're literally pouring oil. You're not pouring oil right there. So therefore, it doesn't count. Aval bizvachim eino kain. But that's not how it works with an animal sacrifice, because shchita achas lekulon. Because every animal sacrifice starts with a slaughter. Kabbalah achas lekulon. Then every korban continues on with catching the blood. Zrika achas lekulon. Then you sprinkle the blood. That's a little bit confusing because the zrika, there is difference in the procedure of how you sprinkle the blood, right? But we'll see that potentially, we'll discuss that, right? That there could be universal ways of sprinkling and things. Tama demaseha muchachim, which means why is it that when it comes to the korban mincha, you don't have to worry about exchanging it for a different intent? Because the actions are clearly, visibly different. So it doesn't matter what you say, because what you're doing, right? Actions matter more than words. That's what you're saying.
So many questions on that price side, right? There's mukrach for the animal that you're shechting also. It could be for an ola.
How can you? Well, how's shechting for an ola different than shechting for a shlomo?
Well, it depends what kind of animal it is that's sitting right there.
I hear that. That's true, right? What kind of animal is it? That's a fair question.
You shecht it, right?
Also true.
That's
also true. There are many different things. That is true. But theoretically, you could have a animal that is shechted in the one place that could be multiple types of korbanos, right? Okay. But theoretically, you're right that if I thought, hey, you know what, this should be a korban pesach, and I use a big animal, right, that's impossible. Right. Then you would be right. Then ma'aseh muchachin, we don't say that. So now ha'ein ma'aseh muchachin. So he says that means that the reason why is because the actions speak louder than words. What if, that means if you wouldn't have actions that are different and distinct, so then it wouldn't, right? Then it would be able to invalidate. So why should that be? Lema, why don't we say Zos Toras HaMincha, Toras Achas, Lichol HaMinachos? It doesn't matter if your korban, 2 different types of korban minchas have the same actions. You shouldn't be able to mix them up anyway, because the rule should be, as we're learning this pasuk, one rule for all korban minchas. If you're saying one rule for all korban chatos is how you're learning the pasuk, then we're going to learn this, Torah Achas Lichol HaMinachos also. El'i itmar hachi itmar. So if you're going to learn this teaching, This is how you have to teach it. It's not from the pasuk Zos Toras Achatos. That doesn't make sense. This is how you teach it. Amar Rav Mishmei de Mavug. Rav says in the name of Mavug, Chatas sheshachta al minas sheyischaper ba nachshon. If somebody slaughters the animal in order so that to change balim, not change the korban. And that's the difference. Shinoi korban. Now he's switching it to shinoi balim. He changed it to you shechted it so that nachshon will get a kapara from it.
Wouldn't that be an avera?
Why?
Because you're changing the form and.
Well, you're changing the intent, right?
Yeah.
That
Valid.
it's kosher, right? It's valid. So is it an avera? I'm not sure it's an avera. It's just that it doesn't count. The korban's not going to count for the sake of its owner, but it can still be brought. Well, in this case, it's actually it can only be brought, and it would have to be valid because those two things go together by the korban chatos, right? It's kosher. So, ein kapara lemesim. Why? Because there's no such thing as atonement for dead people. So therefore, as we had learned once before, if I shecht my korban chatos for the sake of another person who isn't obligated in a korban chatos, it doesn't invalidate my korban chatos. This is nachshon, he's dead. So therefore, he can't invalidate my korban chatos. So if my kohen switches the korban to some other type of korban, so okay, v'lema meis bi'alma. Why'd you pick nachshon? Just pick a dead person. Why doesn't the Mishnah just say if he shechts the korban for a dead person, it doesn't count? Why did he make the whole issue? When you told me it was switching it over to nachshon's korban chatos because it was a different type of a chatos, that was a bigger chid. Now you're telling me it's just because he's dead. That's the big issue. So he says hak mashmal, and this means like this. The reason why it doesn't count is because he's dead. Hochai dumya de nachshon psula, right? But if there was a circumstance where he shechted it in the same way that one shechts it for nachshon, meaning for somebody other person, but that person is alive, then it would invalidate your korban. Umay nihu, what would be that, for example? Chatas nozir v'chatas mitzora. So if you take a korban,
Why is nachshon alive?
You want it to be dead?
I'm not getting it.
nachshon ola, he says.
But if he's alive, then it has to be domet to nachshon.
Well, he's saying a different person. If he was alive, right, even if he would not be chayav a korban, like nachshon, meaning nachshon would be another human being who would be alive, but he wouldn't be chayav a korban chatos, according to this opinion, the korban would be possible, which is not what we said before. This would be a different shita, right?
So nachshon is just some random guy now.
Nachshon is more than a random. Nachshon is a real character who is defined as a person who was a nasi and a tzaddik who didn't owe a korban chatos, right? He only reason why he doesn't invalidate is because he's dead. If Nachshon would have been alive, it would have invalidated, despite the fact that Nachshon is such a character that doesn't need to bring a korban chatos, right? Umay nihu, right? So, no, I'm saying I take that back. That's not what it's saying. It's not what it's saying. I take that back. It's saying that the issue is that he's not chayav a korban chatos. Let's say somebody had let's say the other person, that's what it is. Let's say the other person was like Nachshon in that he was bringing another korban chatos, just not for an avera. He was bringing a korban chatos for a different purpose, like consecrating the Oel Moed. That would invalidate your korban chatos. That's the point. So it's not different than what we said before.
But consecrating the Oel Moed, would that also be an avera?
No, there's no Avera, right? There's no Avera, but there was a Korban Chatos that was brought as part of that. Why do you bring a Korban Chatos when you consecrate the Mizbeach?
Right.
Fair question, but not for this moment, right? But so how do you have a Korban that's similar to Nachshon, right? That only happened one time. The answer is we have Korbanos all the time that are brought as a Chatos, which are not for sins. A Nazir or a Mitzorah, Chatos Nazir, Chatos Mitzorah. So therefore, a chatas for mitzora or
the chatas of nachshon.
Or the chatas of, right? Yeah, but we are not bringing that one anymore, right? So therefore, if somebody has a friend who's a nazir and the korban is shechted on behalf of his friend's korban chatos that he does owe, but it's not a korban chatos of a sin, that does in fact invalidate the korban because the person is chayav a korban chatos. Okay, so. Hani olos nin. We have to stop here in the middle of this. We'll have to pick it up. But these chatos are not really for a kapara. Those chatos are an ola, right? Essentially, they're just donations. They're not really sin offerings in the classical sense. So therefore, they're only brought because you have an obligation to bring them. Therefore, how could that invalidate a korban chatos? It's not a similar situation where you're, right? We said that the person who is who invalidates the korban has to be similar to the person who's really supposed to bring the korban in that he's obligated in a sin offering. Being obligated in a chatos of nazir or mitzorah is not the same thing. So we'll pick this up for tomorrow. We'll stop here, and we'll pick it up tomorrow.
9?